teze i o vladavini prava i o demokraciji i ljudskim pravima vodile su niz aktera koji su za ovim stolom dali veliki doprinos hrvatskoj državnosti i njenoj demokraciji u zadnjih 20 godina. Hvala
vam lijepa. Ja sigurno sam da će gospodin Nigel imati nešto za reći i to vrlo skoro o toj demokraciji unutar Europske unije. Ipak ste vi europarlamentarac dugo vremena.
Well, in a sense, I agree with you. It would be wrong to call the European Union undemocratic. It isn't undemocratic, it's anti-democratic. It actually loathes the very concept of democracy. You said that Mr. Barroso had democratic legitimacy. He was presented to the European Parliament for the European Parliament to approve. We were given a choice of one. That was it. I don't call that democracy. When in smoke-filled, well, it used to be smoke-filled rooms, no longer sadly, but when, cooked up quietly amongst the big countries, and Tony made the point earlier that if France and Germany say yes, then it goes, and we're presented with this fella, and that's it. There's no debate, there's no opposition. So I don't call Mr. Barroso's appointment democratic in any way at all. I have participated, you're quite right, in national debates in other countries. I participated in the French referendum. Remember the French in 2005 had a referendum on the European Constitution. They said no. A few days later, the Dutch had a referendum on the European Constitution, and 2/3 of them said no. Those results were just ignored. Just ignored. What they did was they dropped the name Constitution and they replaced it with something called the Lisbon Treaty. The content was exactly the same as the document that had been rejected. In the case of poor little Ireland, small countries get bullied by the big boys, and twice the Irish have been bullied and forced into overturning results. They could have democratised the EU, they could have done it in the Constitution, they chose not to do it. They hate democracy. And there's a new word in Brussels for democracy. It's called populism. And I remember, after the Irish said no to the Constitution, Herr Schulz, the leader of the Socialist group in the European Parliament, standing up and saying, the EU will not bow to populism. I mean, this is terrifying. And whatever you say around this table about the problems that you've got here in Zagreb or within Croatia, listen, in a sense, I view that as being good, healthy stuff. Because you're arguing amongst yourselves as to whether you've got a good government or a bad government. But goodness me, look what you have got going for you. You've actually got your independence. You've got your own government. You've got your identity. You've got your pride. And all of that has been hard-won in blood. And what you're about to do is to give that away. What you're about to do is to become a province of an empire once again. Don't take my word for it. Take Mr. Barroso's word for it. Mr. Barroso said last year, we are building the first ever non-imperial empire. That comes from the man who is in charge of the European Commission. And Croatian accession is very, very important to them. They will make you all sorts of false promises between now and your referendum. This empire is in trouble. And unless it keeps expanding, unless somebody keeps peddling the wheels, there's a danger that people then start to look even more deeply at the problems within. So already it's being championed in Brussels that Croatia is joining, which shows how wonderful and healthy the whole thing is. I had a little experience the other week. I went into the members' offices in Brussels, this is about 4 months ago, and I had my aeroplane kit to reclaim my expenses. And the chap that served me, I'd never seen him before, didn't recognise him. I said, hello, who are you? And he introduced himself. I said, where are you from? He said, Croatia. I said, I'm sorry. He said, oh yes, they've given lots of us jobs in the European Parliament and in the European Commission, even before your country has joined the Union. And they do that as part of this corrupt practice that I talked about earlier. They are trying to buy the political class. And my fear, coming here today, and having been through this before with Malta and Estonia and many other countries, my fear is that the vast majority of your political class have been purchased already. There are promises of great riches, especially for the civil servants. You know, if you're Croatian, 15,000 euros a month with a tax rate of 12%, it's not a bad ticket, is it? You know, it really isn't a bad game, and several dozen people can benefit from that, and that's my worry. I would just make one promise and perhaps one request. The one promise is, if foreign visitors coming here does help get a proper full debate in Croatia going, then if that's useful, I'd be more than happy to come and take part in debates again. But my one real pleading with all of you, whichever side of this debate you are on, is about the conduct of this referendum. You know, it cannot be democratic to conduct a referendum on a country's constitutional future unless you absolutely make sure that through the media and through levels of expenditure that both sides of this get a fair crack of the whip. Because if one side massively outspends the other side, and we've seen this in many, many accession referendums, then you may well be storing up all sorts of problems for the future. You know, if you take away from people their identity, if you take away from people their ability to govern themselves, then all they are left with, if voting doesn't change anything in the future, all they are left with is civil disobedience, disorder or violence. I think we're beginning to see that in Greece at the moment. You know, they've started burning European Union flags with swastikas drawn on it. You know, these are bad things to be happening in the 21st century in Europe. So you are on the edge of making a massive historic decision. If the people of Croatia want to give their country away, that's fine. You can do that, but make sure it's done in a free and fair referendum. Otherwise, this problem will not go away. Thank you.
Gospodine Farage, thank you. Ono što sam vas htjela pitati, gospodine Farage, vi ste rekli da zapravo u našoj zemlji se često komentira kako ulaskom u Europsku uniju prestaje zapravo i korupcija. Što je sa korupcijom unutar Europske unije? Postoji li toga, ima li toga zapravo u Europskoj uniji i kakve su osobe na tim pozicijama?
Well, look, I mean, this argument that because a few things are wrong in Croatia, we should give everything away because somebody else might run it better than our own people, I think is an appallingly weak argument. When it comes to corruption in the EU, it is a most remarkable setup. The accounts of the European Union have now not been signed off by the auditors for 16 years in a row, which is quite remarkable. I mean, if this was a public company, they'd all be in prison. Those that criticise the accounts get sacked. We've seen that with Marta Andreasen and various others. And if you look at some of the personnel, I mean, it's truly remarkable. There is, I mean, one or two mentioned YouTube. I did do a few years ago, and it's up on YouTube. I went through the list of the European Commission and all their previous criminal convictions. Yeah, I mean, it was wonderful. The French had a commissioner. I mean, top staff. He was convicted of embezzlement, given a 2-year suspended jail sentence, barred from public office for life. And when I dared in the European Parliament to stand up and say this, I mean, all hell broke loose. You think I'd done something dreadful. So we've really, when it comes to corruption, when it comes to financial corruption, I suspect that in Croatia you're just mere beginners.
Samo određena skupina ljudi u komisiji. I to je ono što je zbunjujuće, što hrvatska javnost zapravo ne zna. Je li to zaista tako i zapravo čemu sve ovo ako mi o ničemu više nećemo odlučivati?
Well, I'm not sure actually that you can speak that freely in the European Union Parliament. I mean, I know that I have been fairly openly critical of them, but when I said that Mr. Van Rompuy had the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk and the charisma of a damp rag, I mean, that seemed to me to be general knockabout stuff that you would expect in Parliament. Do you know, I was fined for that. I was fined the maximum fine that can be imposed on an MEP. I mean, if I'd taken 100,000 euros in a bribe to help put some legislation through for a business, the fine I got for just criticising Mr. Van Rompuy was the same as for that. And when I was carpeted by the President of the European Parliament, he said, "It's quite unfair of you to criticise Mr. Van Rompuy. He is, after all, unelected." I said, "I know, that's the point I was trying to make." So, criticism of the EU is in some ways becoming harder. They don't like criticism, and in fact, I have been called not long ago, after a speech I'd given, Danny Cohn-Bendit, the leader of the Greens, said that I and opponents of the Lisbon Treaty were mentally ill. So we're mentally ill for opposing the European Union, and I think that one or two people on this table know about regimes that criticise those who have differing views by writing them off as being mentally ill. There is something being created in Brussels that is not prepared to listen to any other form of argument. It's absolutely cocooned in its own little world. It has its supporters in the political classes out in the member states, but increasingly the peoples of Europe are turning against this thing. And I repeat what I said earlier. I am not anti-European. I want us to have a proper forum where, as sensible European nations, we can sit round the table and agree how we trade together, and agree to cooperate, and agree to try and be good neighbours. But you don't do that by literally giving away control over the levers of power to Herman Van Rompuy or Mr. Barroso.
Tko je izabrao gospodina Van Rompuya I gospodina Barrosa? Tko je glasao za njih?
Well, this is the leaders. This is the leaders that make a decision. And as I say, in Mr. Barroso's case, he had to be put before, or the Commission President has to be put before the European Parliament, but all we were given was a choice of one. When it comes to Mr. Van Rompuy, my old mate, remarkable. I mean, we were told that when Europe had a president, it would be somebody who would be such a giant global figure that he would stop the traffic in Washington and Beijing. And what we actually got was Mr. Van Rompuy, who nobody had ever heard of, and he wouldn't even stop the traffic in Brussels. And I think the reason for that, I think Sarkozy and Merkel lost their nerve. The only person they could have picked that would have had that global influence would have been Blair. Blair was the only one really that could have done that. And I think they felt that if they went for Blair, their own positions and their own prominence would in fact be severely usurped. So we've got this funny little man who is the permanent president of the European Council, but he's actually rather powerful because he's the guy that is pushing the economic governance package. And Tony Cochran made the point earlier that at the moment, if you're in the EU, about 75% of your laws don't get made by your own parliament, they get made by the European institutions, and we have an 8% say over those laws. But what they're working on now for the Eurozone to begin with is that even that bit of your life that you're in control of, namely setting your own budgets, deciding government spending levels, the plans are that all of that will be done at a European level. And the plans are, from 2014, to introduce the first ever direct taxes, direct EU taxes. Now, we're not quite sure how they're going to be, whether it'll be on a tank of diesel, quite how they're going to do this, they haven't really decided. There is some talk of a financial transaction tax. So much as I did rather mock Mr. Van Rompuy, it doesn't mean that he's not a very dangerous little man. And he is a very dangerous little man. You've got to remember, and it may be difficult for you in Croatia to understand this, the people that are running this project believe we should abolish nation states. Abolish them. They must disappear. They must go. We're building a new state with a new flag, a new anthem. It's a new kind of nationalism, Euro-nationalism. And they want to abolish Croatia. That's the reality of it. And you've only been independent for 20 years. Please don't throw it away. That's what I think. That's what I think. I think you'd be mad to throw it away. The EU project is completely out of control and, in my view, very, very dangerous.